This webinar was recorded for subrecipients of the Tennessee Strong Families Grant on May 15, 2026. The presentation provided subrecipients with realistic, family-friendly strategies to support healthy eating habits in young children and pregnant mothers. Topics included new information from the federal DGA Dietary Guidelines for Americans on balanced meals and snacks, reducing meal preparation stress, and practical ways to encourage healthy nutrition within busy family routines. The presentation focused on approachable, evidence-based guidance that families could easily apply in everyday life. The slides and reference materials are posted on our webpage for your reference and review.
Without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. So our presenter today, Dr. Melinda Spooner, has a doctorate in nutrition science and has been investigating diet-related metabolic disease for the past 10 years. Her interest is in therapeutic ketogenic approaches to reverse metabolic disease severity and is currently advancing her education as a certified metabolic health coach. Her aim is to educate individuals about food and food-like products that they eat and inform them about the potential long-term health implication of today's dietary decisions. I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Dr. Spooner. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you so much, Brooke, for your wonderful introduction. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Like Brooke said, my name is Melinda Spooner, and I do work at the University of Tennessee Extension in Family and Consumer Sciences. Today, my talk is centered on the current paradigm shift that we're experiencing with the new dietary guidelines that came out and the Make America Healthy Again, Eat Real Food approach, and why we need to be looking at our food and how critical it is for our children going forward in terms of metabolic disease. And really, this is a really passion project of mine. As a former young mother with children who have different types of health issues. I think it's very important for pregnant moms and for their children to understand where their food is coming from and what it can do to them. So this talk is not about dietary advice or prescriptive. I am not a registered dietitian, and I cannot prescribe or recommend any type of specific diet for any type of condition. And I do not, I am not representing the University of Tennessee or my position with this talk. All the opinions contained herein are my own. But I wanted to share a little bit about my story and kind of where I think things are going and how wonderful I think the new dietary guidelines are in advancing, hopefully, the improvement of our health. So, without further ado, these are the general overall topics I'm going to cover. But really, the key thing is, where does our food come from and what does it do for you or what does it do to harm you? And why would we focus on real food and what is real food anyway? There's a lot of different things that real food is important for. One of which is to hopefully start reversing the chronic disease pandemic, and eventually down the line, hopefully create some generational health. I mean, I think we need a lot of that these days. I'm also going to offer some tips on what to stay away from and things to use when you're weaning from mom to non-mom food. And I'm also going to address some budgetary and meal prepping practical steps that a family can take to incorporate whole real foods instead of buying the oftentimes less expensive and easy option. Why should you consider sharing the nutrition information I am about to present to pregnant moms and young families? Well, I've had class 3 obesity since I was about 22 years old. And that's when I gave birth to my son. I gave birth to my son when I was 25. I had lost some weight before getting pregnant with my daughter at 29. I gave birth to her when I was 30. I was very heavy. I was heavier than the 285 you see on that screen. I was probably closer to 300. But she was born inflamed. I was uneducated. I had no idea what was going on at that point. Her immune system has never been normal. So the purpose of this slide is really to show you how much weight can fluctuate and your biomarkers might not show the whole story. Um, so I've been tracking my weight for quite a while, as you can see, since 2019. Um, but really, it hasn't been until about 2023 that I started really noticing a big shift in the way my biomarkers were measuring. So my triglycerides dropped a lot. So did my insulin. My glucose, however, as you can see, has been very steady for really the entire time. So it's a very interesting thing that I started observing and wanted to know more about. So really, my deep dive has led me to adopt a ketogenic approach to eating and a real deep understanding of what the ultra processed world is doing to us. So now we're going to look at the role of food in chronic disease and longevity. So food should be very simple. We grow it, we raise it, we harvest it, we process it, and then we eat it. But is it really food anymore after we process it? So the clear message here is America's sick. 50% of Americans have prediabetes or diabetes. 75% of adults have at least one chronic condition, and 90% of US healthcare spending goes to treat chronic disease, which is linked to diet and lifestyle. So the story here starts about 1977 when the US Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs released the dietary goals for the US with the goal of combating rising rates of chronic disease in the form of cardiovascular disease. In 1980, the USDA and the US Department of Health and Human Services, or HHS, followed suit and issued the first dietary guidelines for Americans report. Similar reports have been reissued every 5 years. As shown, these 10 sets of recommendations have failed really to effectively counter the rising tide of chronic disease. As you can see, obesity and severe obesity have increased dramatically in both adults and children. So they start measuring children at about the age of 2, and they're really in parallel with one another. So we have to start understanding that when children are faced with metabolic syndrome, they often become adults with metabolic syndrome too. The other key point here is that diabetes is also on the rise, and it is also in parallel to those obesity rates. But we all receive the same dietary guidance regardless of what our metabolic status is. So why does this matter? Well, life expectancy for the US in general is less than all of our other peers. So when you start considering the fact that we are very sick as a country, those health adjusted lifespan data reflect an additional decrease of nearly 5 years. So all in all, we're losing about 12, almost 13 years of life expectancy because of the way we live. And this is lifestyle in general, but nutrition and physical activity, stress, sleep, all of those factors certainly play a role. So why is this happening? Well, the way I see it, my opinion is that these points are really what underlies the diet-related health problems that we currently face. So we no longer distinguish the differences between real food and food-like products. Food-like products are addictive. We overconsume these food-like products. We underconsume real food. This causes metabolic mayhem. Then we get sick. Then we depend on a medical system that does not address diet. And then we have a system that deals with symptom management, not the root cause of the disease. So nobody's looking at why this is happening. We're facing a crisis that affects pregnant mothers and their children. This is, in my opinion, an existential threat. I mean, we have a pandemic of metabolic disease that affects 93% of people. Those people have cardiometabolic health that is poor, and diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and obesity are responsible for about 70% of the mortality rate in this country. The behavioral risk factors are mostly diet. Diet's number one, lack of physical activity is number two. These two things are things that we can control. These are individual lifestyle and behavioral factors that can either help us or harm us. So what we do in terms of our dietary intake can determine whether or not we become healthy or unhealthy. So all in all, much of what we're experiencing today is due to a root cause that's called insulin resistance. This is a diet-related metabolic disease that is worldwide. It affects people who are thin, it affects people who are large, and it doesn't matter what age you are. So generally, this one underlying problem is something that affects a whole bunch of different diagnostic definitions. So somebody who has diabetes is also insulin resistant. Somebody who has cardiovascular disease likely has insulin resistance as well. And same goes for people with different types of dementias and those types of things too. So just as a broad statement, insulin resistance is really at the root cause of most of this health challenges that we're facing. Why is this important for mothers and babies? Well, the prevalence of diabetes has risen exponentially over 20 years since the dietary guidelines were introduced, and to about a little past 1995, where the diabetes epidemic began. And this is in line with the adoption of the US dietary guidelines for Americans. So this is important because if you think about moms and their children, it takes about that 20 years for somebody to start developing metabolic disease that starts becoming something that they can diagnose, which is typically obesity. It doesn't always have to be obesity, but there may be other metabolic things that doctors can start catching, but it does take generally about that long. Data show that about 2/3 of women who are of reproductive age are either overweight or obese, and 18% of pregnant women who are pregnant have just or can get gestational diabetes, which is a carbohydrate intolerance. Excess weight and excess blood sugar in pregnant women are by far the most common causes of excess fetal growth. So that's when babies are very large. My daughter was one of those. She was 9 pounds, 10 ounces when she was born. Childhood obesity and diabetes are on the rise as well. So according to Dr. Robert Siwas, there are 4 categories of children that are affected by poor nutrition. And really, this summary slide pretty much lets you know that all children are affected by poor nutrition. So, these can be obese children, skinny children who lack muscle integrity. It can be children that have different developmental issues, as well as healthy children who consume adequate fat and protein with minimal carbohydrates, but it may be highly processed. So, what are the key components of a child's diet? What should they be? Well, to support brain health and development, overall, fat, especially omega-3 fatty acids, are very important for children, as well as adequate protein at 20 to 25% of their intake. So This slide is very busy, but I think it's very important because since the introduction of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans in 1977, which is nearly 50 years ago, Americans have become increasingly unhealthy. The Dietary Guidelines for Americans influences every health professional association, their positions on nutrition. Those impact schools, hospitals, the medical industry, including practitioners like dietitians and nutritionists. Military rations are determined by the dietary guidelines. And finally, possibly the most significant factor is the influence on the food industry. But when we examine the impact of the guidelines, we see that they also influence public and private sectors, with particular impact on families through the USDA-funded feeding programs that they influence. The most relevant is the Women, Infants, and Children's Program, or WIC, which I think probably all of you are familiar with. But the health of the toddlers that that program serves is they are negatively impacted. Nationally, about 14.4% are obese, 15.4% of these children are overweight, and this increases with age, and people of color are disproportionately affected by both overweight and obesity. These other programs are also affected by the Dietary Guidelines for Americans, SNAP, and the National School Lunch Program and feeding programs for the elderly, but those are really beyond the scope of the talk today. So the result of the Dietary Guidelines for Americans on the food industry is really, sadly, not good at all. In fact, the majority of food grown on a farm today is being transformed into things that resemble food, but is no longer food that we would recognize in the wild. This is ultra-processed food, and it takes up about 70% of the grocery store and your grocery bill, while just 30% remains in its whole food form. The new dietary guidelines that were just released this year are for the periods from 2025 to 2030. And these have set the stage for a Eat Real Food revolution to address the state of chronic disease in the United States. These are the key changes for protein and dairy. So protein intake has gone up from 0.8 grams per kilogram to 1.2 to 1.6. And dairy has shifted from a low fat recommendation to a full fat recommendation. And just so you understand what that equates to as far as saturated fat, so 3 servings a day would equal about 6 grams of saturated fat in the diet coming from the dairy sources. So these changes mean more satiety and help with muscle development, as well as preservation of muscle mass. So this will help us displace the impact of the ultra-processed foods in the diet. Healthy fats are still a controversial thing. The dietary guidelines still want us to limit to less than 10% of calories per day coming from healthy fats, but healthy fats can include meats, poultry, eggs, omega-3 rich seafood, nuts, seeds, full fat dairy, olives, and avocados. But beef fat, like tallow, is now considered a healthy fat. So I think that that's a fairly refreshing thing to see happen. So this is a snapshot from the previous dietary guidelines in 2020, 2025, where they identified the predominant sources of saturated fat. And these sources kind of surprised me because we've been hearing for so long that meat and eggs and dairy aren't really great for you, okay? But what I'm seeing here is that most of the sources of saturated fat are actually coming from things that are highly processed. So those are your sandwiches and your desserts and sweets, rice and pasta, and grain-based mixed dishes, those types of things. Whereas the meats are really pretty low. So only 3% of meats that exclude deli and mixed dishes eh, have are included in the sources of saturated fat. So it's kind of interesting to me that we've said that especially beef is a major source of saturated fat in our diet, but it's really not. So I just kind of wonder why that is, and then what are the other sources, the 20% of other sources where saturated fat is coming from. It would be nice to have a detailed explanation on that. So this data I was able to find that shows the fats found in unprocessed or minimally processed real foods. And I just wanted to point out here that even bacon, ground beef, and eggs, they are higher in unsaturated fat than they are in saturated fat. So this is per 100 grams, and those 100 grams are equivalent to about 3.5 slices of bacon or 3.5 ounces of hamburger or a half cup of palm oil. Um, the oil and uh, dairy products are, more 50-50 as far as their saturated to unsaturated fat concentrations. So this is just kind of giving you an idea that really the unsaturated fat is really a pretty good amount compared to the saturated fat in all of these foods. So what do fats in ultra-processed foods look like? Well, they're very similar to the unprocessed foods. So the saturated fat tends to be 3 to 6 grams per 1 tablespoon. If you add that up and compare it to a whole food that's not simply oil, then it is about similar to, something that you would have as far as a hamburger or bacon. So I just wanted to show you that, even these oils, the vegetable oils and stuff that we're using and that are found in these ultra processed foods, they all have a fair amount of saturated fat in them as well. So the dietary guidelines, as far as fruit and vegetables go, do support continuing to have 3 servings a day of vegetables, 2 servings a day of fruits, but really with some caveats for the fruits especially. We have to understand that dehydrating fruit is going to concentrate the amount of sugar that you take in compared to a fresh apple. So just think about things like that, when working with the families that you work with, where a dried fruit is going to have significantly more sugar in it than the whole fruit. And same thing with the juices. Juices are extracted from the whole fruit and they leave water and some flavored, um, from whatever the juice is. So whether it's grape juice or apple juice, there is some vitamin and mineral content still in it, but a lot of that gets depleted, especially on the store shelf when it's exposed to the lights and to air. So I wanted to show you the ingredient labels of a couple different formulas because I know when mothers are weaning from their breast milk to a formula, or if they go straight to a formula, if they can't nurse, we need to know what's in these formulas, okay? So human breast milk typically has about 7.4 grams of carbohydrates, along with 3.6 grams of fat and 1.2 grams of protein per deciliter. This varies widely based on the mother's diet, her stage of lactation, and the unique needs of the mother-child pair. But we need to understand that lactose is a dominant sugar, not corn syrup solids like what you find in the Enfamil product here. Corn syrup solids are actually the first ingredient on this nutrition label of the Enfamil, whereas the Kendamil product, their first ingredient is whole milk. And there's about 10.8 grams of carbohydrates per 5 ounces when the product is mixed up. So really, neither one of these can replace mother's milk, but the Enfamil has products in it that don't represent at all what mother's milk looks like. And then just to compare the formulas to juices, because a lot of mothers, in my experience and just my own life lessons, I learned that really juice is an easy thing for us to give our children. And for a lot of us, we just didn't know. Nowadays, it's being suggested that the juice should be watered down, but the juice itself has 28 grams of carbohydrates. And while that's not added sugar, it's still a concentrated form, kind of like what we discussed earlier. And 66% of that carbohydrate is in the form of fructose. Fructose is a more I'm not going to say dangerous, but less favorable sugar. You don't want to be consuming that in high quantities in your diet. So when we're thinking about sugar, which is not recommended at all with the new dietary guidelines, we need to understand where sugar is coming from and what it's found in. So we've just seen some products, but if we can kind of start understanding that table sugar, which is sucrose, is a 50-50 mix of a glucose and fructose molecule. So there's one molecule of each. High fructose corn syrup, which is found in many highly processed products, is more fructose than glucose. And when you look at the fruit juice, it's again much more than even the high fructose corn syrup in terms of fructose versus glucose. And on the graph on the right-hand side, you'll see that we've had definitely an increase in added sugars and fruit juice, and then it's kind of come back down a bit since 2000. But our table sugar increase or has decreased while our high fructose corn syrup has increased. So we're automatically getting more fructose in our diet than we normally would if we had just stuck with the sucrose. Whole grains in the new dietary guidelines are encouraged, but nobody needs to eat highly processed refined carbohydrates. I've listed a few examples here of the amount of carbohydrates that are found in some popular refined carbohydrate products. And as you can see, some of the ready-to-eat or packaged breakfast options are very, very, very high in carbohydrates for a serving. And they don't leave you satiated. The guidelines really would like to encourage you to aim for 2 to 4 servings of fiber-rich whole grains, so grains that don't have the fiber stripped out. Okay, so we've learned a little bit about where sugar comes from, approach to the differences in whole grain wheat and corn versus refined wheat and corn. So we can see that whole grain products have less starch, more protein, and more fat compared to the refined products. The refined products have, of course, more starch because the protein and fiber has been stripped out. And in the case of corn, that the fat has also been stripped out. So what this means is that there's more of a glucose spike when you consume the processed products versus the whole grain products. The fiber helps slow the release of that glucose down once it's in your system, and that helps your body adjust to the massive increase of carbohydrates that it's going to have to deal with. And on the right-hand side, we can see that the refined grains make up the majority of grain products that we eat overall in youths age 1 to 19, and then for adults age 20 and over. So really, grains are a significant source of where we get our carbohydrates from. So to address some of these issues, and I'll let you know I'm kind of biased because I have done this journey. I have been a highly processed mom. I've raised my kids on it. But I've also been really sick. I've gained a lot of weight and I'm trying to fix myself. So I was really happy to see that the new dietary guidelines have addressed chronic disease head on, really. I mean, the way they have laid things out this go around is really to address the chronic disease problems we have in our country. And they even go so far as to promote a lower carbohydrate diet if that is something that the patient or the person is interested in, and if they can, work with their healthcare professionals to help them adopt such a diet. So things are slowly changing. So I just wanted to kind of celebrate that and hopefully this will help the families make better lifestyle choices. So, I've already shown you that insulin resistance is the root cause of metabolic disease. We've addressed the fact that the dietary guidelines for Americans really needed a significant rework based on our health trajectory over the last 50 years. And I think the new dietary guidelines address the chronic disease crisis and give us some real options and guidance that can help us do that. So now we need to go to work to undo what's been done. So we know that the social determinants of health influence access and ability to source real food. Pregnant moms may receive assistance through programs like WIC and SNAP and other sources that can help bridge the gap to accessing real food. However, we must first know what real food is and be able to identify it in a world full of unprocessed or ultra processed food. This has really led me to want to understand and talk about sugar and why I'm so passionate about challenging this dietary dogma of having to have excessive carbohydrates at every point in the day. Here is just a really quick example of kind of how much sugar is found in a teaspoon to start out with. So there's about 4 grams of sugar in 1 teaspoon. This is an example of a bowl of oatmeal with a 1/4 cup of blueberries and some milk. And in this meal alone, somebody would be consuming 9 teaspoons of sugar in the form of the carbohydrates that are in this meal, okay? So that's 37 1/4 grams of sugar. But that's what has been considered a very healthy breakfast for us for decades. I remember not really understanding the ingredient labels when I was on WIC as a young mom. I used to get creamy peanut butter or crunchy peanut butter all the time. So I guess I want to put it out there and see if you all can identify what ingredients are not naturally found in peanut butter. You can put that in the chat. All right. So peanut butter does have carbohydrates, but there should not be any added sugars. In this case, there's 2 added sugars. There's regular table sugar, and then there's molasses. And then there's potentially 3 different types of vegetable oils in addition to monoglycerides. All of those things don't need to be in regular peanut butter. So yes, this is a less expensive option for people to buy at the grocery store. But what are the long-term cost effects in terms of the additives of this product? This product is the same thing. It's just organic, great value from Walmart, and it's more expensive, but it has 2 ingredients: the organic roasted peanuts and the sea salt. There is no added sugars. So really the customer is paying for the filler, whereas this product is unadulterated, make the product ultra processed. So this is an example of the standard American diet in terms of food-like products that are marketed to children. So this is the amount of sugar in carbohydrates in the text, as well as the graphic with the teaspoons. And this comes out to 66 teaspoons of sugar in the form of carbohydrates and or added sugar for one day for a child on a standard American diet. So if you were to buy all of this stuff and feed it to your child, that is how much sugar in one day that child would be consuming. This is a healthier approach. So, same type of concept, but in this case, using the whole grains, lower sugar cereals, or non-fat or low-fat milk, the way we've been being taught for many, many years, that would be 38 teaspoons of sugar. In this case, I did use the cooked beans for the dinner meal, which kicks up the carbs quite a bit to 57.2 because really, our society has been promoting plant-based, and a lot of folks will eat the cooked beans over fish or meat. And fish and meat have very low carbohydrate. In fact, they're probably trace amounts depending on the product. And then this is an example of a standard American diet for the busy mom. So at least the way I used to be, I'd grab a bagel with cream cheese, my flavored coffee, maybe a banana, and then I'd be eating kind of on the go all day. This is really astounding in the amount of sugar that I probably used to eat all the time. So this comes out to 90 teaspoons of sugar or 363 grams of sugar for one day on a standard American diet. This has profound implications on you, especially if you're dealing with diabetes or you're trying to manage your blood sugar if you're pre-diabetes. So this is what healthy food looks like. It's a good variety of your meat and your dairy, some eggs, some berries. Berries are really good fruits to eat for your low glycemic foods, and then cruciferous vegetables, and of course, your milk. So these are my tips for adopting a healthier lifestyle and being able to shop in a practical manner at your local grocery store. So the first thing is to prioritize protein. Second is to shop the perimeter of the store for the natural and whole foods. The third tip is to shop at the reduced price area in the meat department. That's big time. And then purchase in bulk to increase your affordability. And don't overcomplicate things. Make your meals simple. If you have simple meals, you have simple prep, and then you can have healthier families. So in terms of prioritizing protein, this is a screen grab that I got from the Walmart website. And this is just showing you really that you can get a good amount of protein for pretty inexpensive. This ground beef and pork blend, the 3-pound chub, is your best value out of all of these products at 27 cents an ounce. But if you made this up into quarter-pound hamburgers, you'd be getting about 16 grams of protein. The pre-made sliders are going to cost you a premium. They're the more expensive product by far, and this is going to be true really across most of your products. And this is just to show you that you can cook a good variety of different types of food with hamburger and have it be nutritious, including vegetables and seasonings, or you can just enjoy a simple grilled hamburger patty. Tuna is a very good source of protein. It's also lower in fat and higher in omega-3 fatty acids, which is really good for you too. One can is 24 grams of protein, and as you can see, the price is it's higher for the quantity you get, but one can has a lot of protein for its buck. So I think that's a really great option, especially if you're on the go. I think the things to watch out for with canned tuna is a lot of different additives. Most of them will use additional oils and seasonings and things that may or may not be necessary for you. As far as pregnant moms go, the Safe Catch brand is lower in mercury, so this is probably a safer product for a mom who's expecting. And again, an idea of the different ways you can prepare canned tuna. And this would be the same for canned salmon if somebody was interested in that. Eggs are by far the most affordable source of protein. They are low in cost, high protein, high satiety, and they're very versatile. So you can see here that really they're about 6 cents an ounce as far as protein goes, and very, very affordable. 5 dozen eggs at Walmart is $7.13. That'll get your family through quite a while. And again, very, very versatile. You can do them up into omelets or fried sunny side up or hard boiled, however you like them. And they can be added to all kinds of things too. You can throw them on a hamburger. So like I said, shopping the perimeter of the store is by far where you're going to find your Whole Foods and fresher foods. But I would watch out for the fresh bread, the deli, and even some of the frozen fruit and the dairy and eggs sections, because a lot of those do have kind of a mix of processed products that may be higher in sugar or other ingredients that you don't really need in your diet. I would stick primarily to the fresh fruit and vegetables, as well as the meat, poultry, dairy, and eggs. And then, if you need to shop for frozen fruits, just be very careful with those. So, as far as finding discounts, I would look at the yellow reduced price tags at Walmart. There's really great deals that you can get on all of your meat products because they don't want those to spoil. So once they're kind of getting close to their expiration date, they will reduce them and you can get them at a pretty good deal. Kroger does the same thing, and they actually have a small meat section where their daily overstock is marked down to sell fast. You can also look the store brands for better pricing per ounce. And in general, you should expect that pre-made foods are likely to be more expensive. They may have more than 1 to 5 ingredients, and they will probably have very little protein compared to carbohydrates or sugar. So buying in bulk is by far one of the greatest ways to save some money. So here I've given some different examples for chicken and beef. So if you buy in 10-pound quantities, your price per ounce decreases pretty dramatically. The chicken is 5.5 cents an ounce for that Tyson fresh chicken leg quarters bag. And then the 10-pound chub of the 73% lean, 27% fat ground beef is 30 cents an ounce compared to the other products. So you're saving a bit of money there. So when I come home, I buy in bulk. Admittedly, I'm a Costco shopper myself, but if I even buy at Walmart or a Kroger, I try to buy as much in bulk as I can. It's just me and my husband these days, but we do live in a 42-foot fifth wheel trailer, and so we don't have a lot of space. So what I like to do is prep all my meals on the weekend. And it's been very liberating to not have to think about what I'm going to eat every day when I get home from work or am I going to have to prepare an hour of food to be able to eat when I get home when I'm tired and I have an hour-long commute every day. I'm looking constantly for ways to make my life easier. So I prep usually 3 to 6 pounds of bacon, 6.5 pounds-ish of hamburger that I make into quarter-pound patties. And that picture shows kind of how I do it. I have 2 of these plastic containers and I smash them together with the hamburger in between. And it gives me the patties that I can pre-make, pre-cook, and I just stick them in my refrigerator so I can pull them out after work. Sometimes I'll make Texas style chili, and then I usually have an alternative protein, and that'll range from chuck roast or brisket to pork shoulder. Sometimes I'll do chicken, but I'm not really a big chicken fan. The other thing that I eat a lot is hard-boiled eggs, and if you have a foodie or a Instapot, you can make 2 dozen hard-boiled eggs in about probably 15 minutes and super simple and not overcook them. So these are my general tips for doing a dinner meal prep. I would pick a couple of proteins that your family likes to eat. Also pick a couple of whole food side dishes, whether that's fruit, vegetables, your whole grains, to feed your family for 3 or 4 days. And then make a simple meal out of those ingredients, package them up, and store in your refrigerator for different days of the week. And then you can just reheat and eat when you get home. It really does make your week evenings a lot more simple. Same thing for your lunch meal prep. Generally the same, probably not as big of a meal, and you can use different proteins. And this is where maybe I would pick the tuna or the canned salmon to give me some variety, and maybe just make a salad to go with, or hard-boiled eggs. But same thing, store in the refrigerator until you're ready to eat it. And you can pack it in your lunch bag to take to work or in your children's lunch bag. And the breakfast meal prep, kind of the same, but it kind of depends. Like I tend to like to eat my breakfast at home, so I don't tend to make breakfast to go really. But you can do that, and you can make it into egg bites that would have some vegetables and eggs and maybe some bacon or sausage, those types of things, and then individually package those to store in your refrigerator to take on the go. This kind of has all led me to like where I am, my why. I have 12 years of nutrition education from my bachelor's degree all the way through my doctorate. The knowledge that I gained during that time was not sufficient for me to heal myself. So, what I've wound up doing is doing a lot of experimentation and healing. And as this whole process has played out, I've really developed this passion and purpose for hopefully giving people hope that they can do similar things. And not everybody's path is going to look like mine, and I get that. But I think it's really important that we start thinking about what we're doing for the future of our country, of our world. And really, I've come up with this term generational health. I really want to be able to help people and translate what I've learned into practical, usable advice. I'm currently working on my metabolic health coaching certificate, so that I can help people make those lifestyle changes. So I really want to be healthy so I can enjoy being a part of my grandchildren's lives. I have 4 grandchildren right now, working on number 5. And so it's really important to me to ensure that they have all the opportunities in the world to be healthy as they grow up. And so this is my family and my journey in kind of my transformation of how, over the last 4 years, I've made major strides in my health and fitness. And what's really stood out to me is that my parents are older. My dad just turned 80, and my mom is 77. And they're still with us, but they both have health problems. And I see all of these other people standing around us in this group picture, and there's so much opportunity to get healthier. And that's what I look forward to is helping the rest of my family and my extended family to understand what they're doing and understand how our food choices really do matter. The things that you should take away from this talk are really that your lifestyle directly affects your family, and pregnant moms and their children need optimal nutrition that's based on their unique needs at their unique uh, stage of life. And also understand that optimal nutrition requires the limitation of carbohydrates, primarily all forms of sugar. All forms of sugar really should be avoided if you can. If you're going to have carbohydrates, stick with whole grains, not refined grains. And I would even limit starchy vegetables. I mean, it's not that you can't have them, it's that you should, enjoy them on special occasions, we'll say. But juices and dehydrated fruit are things that really should be avoided. The 2025 to 2030 dietary guidelines is the first time really that chronic disease is addressed to the public and really advocates for following a lower carbohydrate approach. And finally, I think a healthy lifestyle begins in the home. I think if you can choose whole foods, prioritize proteins, include healthy fats, including saturated fats, and limit processed and ultra processed products, then your home and your children and families will be healthier. And with that, I'll say thank you. And there's my contact information. And I look forward to any questions you might have. Thank you.